Hi everyone, Christina here. Today I have another mail art video for you. I'm going to be using this stamp set called Wishing You from W Plus 9 to decorate an envelope that I'll be sending to my friend Nicole. So because I'm going to be doing a lot of painting and watercoloring on this envelope, I'm using some watercolor paper to create the envelope. This is Canson 90-pound watercolor paper, and I'm using this particular weighted paper because it's not too thick. I've tried to make a watercolor envelope in the past with regular watercolor paper that was thicker, and it was sort of hard to score the paper, and it didn't work out as well. The painting was great, but it wasn't great for creating an envelope. So I'm using an 8x8 piece of watercolor paper to create an A2 card, and I just slide that into my We Are Memory Keepers envelope punch board. I put it over to the 3.5 mark and then punched and then scored. When you're creating an A2 envelope, just remember that your paper is 8x8. The first measurement is 3.5, and then the second measurement is 4.5. That's what I do. So 3.5 punch score, 4.5 punch score, and then repeat until all of the sides have been scored. I love to create envelopes like this with the punch board because you can use whatever paper you like. You could use wrapping paper, you could use pattern paper. Some cardstocks are a little bit too thick, so I might not use that, but it's great for any custom envelopes you want to make. Because I'm going to be watercoloring this, I wanted to mask off that envelope area, so I very carefully lined up my masking tape along those score lines, and then I also taped down the edges of the envelope. Now these edges are quite a bit away from the area where I'm going to be painting, but I did want to tape it down because I didn't want the paper to start pulling away from the surface and causing hills and valleys as I add water and creating big puddle areas. I'm using some StazOn jet black ink to stamp the two bunnies from the stamp set in the bottom corner. I'm using StazOn ink in particular because it's waterproof and bleed proof. I'm going to be adding tons of water on top, and I want to make sure that those lines don't bleed. StazOn's sometimes hard to get off your clear stamps, so I'm using some Hero Arts Ultra Clean stamp cleaner to get that off my stamps. Before I start the background, I'm going to mask off the bunnies. This is because I want to keep the bunnies completely white until I'm ready to paint them, and I want to add tons of color around the outside of the bunnies, and I knew that if I was careful, I probably could have painted around it and not have to worry about masking them off, but just to make it everything a little cleaner and to ensure that those bunnies didn't get any weird edges, I decided to go ahead and put on some masking fluid. This is drawing gum masking fluid. As long as you paint on a really thin coat, you shouldn't have any problems whatsoever. This was actually really dry after just a few minutes. It took absolutely no time at all to dry, and I was really surprised. I'm using 5 different colors of Distress ink for this background. I'm using Sealess Preserves, Abandoned Coral, Chipped Sapphire, Wild Honey, and Black Soot. These are the colors I'm using just for the upper portion of the background behind the bunnies. And the first thing I did was wet that area really well with a large brush, and then I started dropping in color. So this initial wash of color, I wasn't too convinced that I liked how the colors were mixing, so I ended up taking my paper towel and dabbing off quite a bit of that color. But after I dried it, it created a great base layer for adding more colors on top. So I took the same colors that I used before and just painted over the top. And this time I started with Chipped Sapphire first. Then I moved to Sealess Preserves, Abandoned Coral, and then also to Mustard Seed, or Wild Honey actually. So, and I really loved how those colors mixed with this application as compared to starting with the yellow color before. I think it just needed to have the color starting at the top of the paper and moving down. Then I brought in some black soot around that top corner to have a little more contrast, some darkness in that top corner. I'm going to be putting my postage stamp up there, so I wanted lots of contrast up in that top corner. I'm going to be using the Distress sprayer today to spray on some water droplets. This is a new water bottle for me, and I absolutely love it. This is my first time using it, and it's really fantastic. The thing that's cool about this sprayer is that when you pull the trigger just halfway, you get droplets of water, and they're a little bit easier, or they're a little bit smaller, a little more spattered than if I was to use my regular method, which is to spray the water into my hand and then flick the water on with my fingers. I kind of like this application because, for one thing, my hand doesn't get wet and I'm not having to go dry off my hand a ton, but also because I get smaller water droplets and it almost looks even more random. I just really love how it turned out. So I'm just adding on a few more water droplets just to get that going, and then picking up the water with my paper towel, and it just pulls up that color that's underneath. So I'm protecting the bottom portion for a minute here. I'm going to be adding some white spatter on top of this, or white splatter. And I got this tip from Julie Ebersol in one of her videos, and I thought it was so smart and it works out so great. I'm taking some white paint from the Kuretake Gansai Tombi palette, and I'm putting that over on my palette. This palette that I'm using is kind of a DIY palette. It's just white cardstock that I put through a laminator so that the surface is slick. And I'm going to take my paintbrush and flick it off the edge of that palette, and it's going to give me a little bit more control over where all of those paint drops fall. And I really love this application because it stopped me from getting paint all over my work surface. It's been really great. So I let that dry completely, and then it was time to take off the masking. And you have to remember to let your background or your painting dry absolutely bone dry before you take off the drying gum or masking fluid. That's because if it's not completely dry, you run the risk of tearing your paper as you start to pull it away. Paper, when it's wet, is not as strong, and so when you pull away at the paper, when you pull with that drying gum, it pulls up the surface. So make sure your paper is completely dry before you remove it. Painting the bunnies with a couple different colors actually. This first color I'm using is Pumice Stone, and I'm using just a really light color for this. I added lots of water. I dried that first initial painting, and then I added a little bit of Chipped Sapphire into that Pumice Stone, and that's just going to cool out that gray color and give it a little bit of a bluish tinge. I wanted to do that so that it sort of alluded to the fact that it's a nighttime sky. So after I had the bunnies painted, I painted the bottom portion, and I'm creating kind of a grass area using black soot. I'm not using a lot of water with this. I want it just liquid enough that I can paint it on, and that's because I want that bottom portion to be extremely dark. This is going to create a great place to write in my friend's mailing address, so that it's easy to see on the envelope, and hopefully there won't be any problems with the postman delivering it to her. So after I painted on all of those little bits of grass and created a very opaque scene, I used my heat tool just to help dry that entire area. And then it was time to figure out exactly where my postage stamp was going to go. So this is the stamp that I picked out. I picked this one because it's black and white and it doesn't compete with all the color on the envelope. And I'm also going to put my friend's name on it. So this is Dr. P.H. Martin's Pen White. It's a really opaque white ink that I really love for lettering or just adding anything white over the top of colorful backgrounds. I could have used that same white paint from that watercolor palette that I used for the droplets, but as you notice, those droplets did kind of fade back a little bit. It's not a really, really bright white, and so I knew that I would need to use something a little bit different to write on my friend's name. So this is my friend Nicole McGorrick, and she's fantastic. She's a wonderful card maker here on YouTube. She does really creative cards, uses a lot of the same stamp brands that I love and I like to use on my cards, and her cards are always super creative and just fantastic. So I'm going to link to her YouTube channel down in the video description if you want to check that out. She's fantastic. I totally love Nicole. So I'm just putting a little more color on some areas so her name stands out more. I also added some flourishes and some little loops just to fill in the areas, make it look a little bit more interesting, and just to basically embellish her name so that it looks a little bit better. And like I said before, I'm going to be putting her address down below in that black area. So I'm not going to be showing you that, since it is her home address, but I just painted that on later using some white paint, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute here. So you might be thinking that, well, this envelope is entirely Distress ink and it's not very safe to send through the mail. Well, Distress Glaze is a product that's been out for a little bit and I've been wanting to use it and I could not resist trying it out on this and it worked out so fantastic. What it is it's like this kind of waxy material. It's sort of, to me, has the consistency of like a soft lip balm, and you just pick up a little bit of it on with your fingertip and then put it on your project, whatever you want to protect and kind of make waterproof, and you just smear it in with your finger, and it's really slippery and it glides across the paper. You do get a little bit of a shine when you initially apply it, but then you take a paper towel and you use the paper towel to kind of buff off any of the extra glaze that might be on there. And what this does is it just puts down a layer of protection over that entire area where you've applied it. I was skeptical about this. I was like, there is no way that it could really protect everything underneath, but believe me, it totally does. In fact, as I was using this, it created a problem because I couldn't get my stamp to stick to it anymore because the surface was so slick. So I ended up using some Ranger Multimedia Matte on the back of this postage stamp to adhere that down, because otherwise I couldn't even get that stamp to stick, and that's because it was so slick. And I also wanted to mention that when I painted on her address, I had to use a white acrylic paint because I couldn't get my white gel pen to work on that surface as well. I added one more postage stamp just to make sure it gets to her, and that is the envelope for today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will be back on Monday for a card video. Thank you so much for watching today's video. As you can see on screen, I love to create creative envelopes for my friends to send my handmade cards in. So I've got a few other envelope videos for you to check out. You can click on them on screen whenever you'd like. The links are also listed down in the video description below in case you're on a mobile device or a tablet. Thank you again for watching, and I will catch you guys next week.